Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and have you ever made an entire black quilt or the shades of black and gray? Well, it can be very striking. When we put blacks and grays together, it really can have a big impact. It's all about how rich that black is so that the grays really do show up. Now, I have a free pattern that we're going to be able to make a stunning quilt out of blacks and grays. And we get to use 12 different blacks and 12 different grays. Now, if you're not into black and gray, you could definitely make this quilt in any fabrics. It's quick, it's fun, and it really does have a lot of modern impact. So the quilt is going to be made with 12 different blacks and 12 different grays, and they can be ranging from light to dark. Now this collection of fabric is from Andover Fabrics, called Century Black on Black 2 and their grays. And this is the free pattern that goes with it. So we're going to make this quilt just as it is with this pattern. It really is going to be a striking quilt. Now the quilt is all made with a stitch and flip technique. So it's going to go together really easy. And to cut these blocks, we are going to need a total of 54 blocks cut in black and 54 cut in gray. The gray blocks are these 5.5-inch blocks. The blacks are 6.5 by 9.5. So when we read the pattern, it does have us cut 6 of the fabrics, and we need 5 rectangles from each. And from 6 of the fabrics, we're going to need 4 rectangles of each. And the same for the gray. Now I started and I cut my long strips at 9.5 inches. So I had those long strips, 9.5 inches, and then I did cut them down to 6.5. And that way I was able to get all of the pieces plus what I needed from one strip of fabric. And I did have a little bit left over. So if you like, you can always make it bigger. So I have the rectangles, the squares, and my binding all ready to go. Now the stitch and flip method is really easy. We need to take all of these squares and we're going to put lines on them on the back from corner to corner. So here's that 5.5-inch square, and we need to draw a line from that corner to that corner. That will then be placed on the rectangle, and we would stitch on that line. Once we stitch, we're going to trim, but we're going to end up with a big piece of fabric, so I recommend doing 2 rows of stitching, and that way we can use the leftovers for another project. So I still have that sewing line from corner to corner, but I do have an additional sewing line, and this space is 1/2 inch. So we're going to place right sides together and we're going to match up those corners. The piece that has that extra line should be coming to this corner. That way when we stitch here and flip that over, our corner is going to stay right. So I'm going to line up my squares and I'm going to go to the machine and stitch on this line. But I'm not going to actually stitch on the line. I'm going to stitch right beside the line. And I mean really, really beside the line. When we are stitching through these layers, we're stitching with the top thread and the bottom thread. So we have 2 layers of thread. If we go right on that line, we have that thickness of the thread that we have not compensated for. So sometimes when that happens, we will end up with just a little bit of fabric sticking out. If you stitch right beside, you are giving that thread its space it needs to flip over. So there's the line that I drew, and I stitched right beside. Now when we fold this back, it fits perfect. There's no little threads sticking out of the corner. It's perfect right along this edge and all the way around. So this is how the block is going to look. but I need to trim off this piece. And that's a big piece that I'm going to be able to use for another project. And that's why I drew that second line. So now I can stitch on that second line. And for the second line, just stitch right on top. You don't have to go on one side or another because this will be trimmed down. So we have that secondary line close to that point. Now we can cut in between using a 1/4 inch. So we've made an additional half square triangle for another project, and we know when this is pressed back, it is exact. When we look at the pattern, we will see that those little stitch and flips we have going in 2 different directions. So when we're at the machine stitching, we're going to need to do 54 going in one direction and 54 going in the other direction. And to make sure that these go together easily, I'm going to take one pile, take those seam allowances, and press them in one direction, which means this pile, the seam allowances are going to go in the opposite direction. So now when we match up those corners, it is going to be easy to nestle that seam together and get a nice point. And that point does not come to the end of the fabric, it comes into the fabric. Once we get all of these stitched together, we're going to have a total of 27 of these blocks. And we're going to sew these together in columns. And we have 3 long columns. When we look, each column has one block that is sewn together so that it looks like a square. We have arrows coming down and arrows coming up. So I'm going to have 3 of these long rows. And by the way, each one of these rows is the same. These 2 rows are the same. This row is the same, just put in the opposite directions. I think this would look fabulous on the wall in a very modern house. It would really give impact to the room. And then don't forget, we do have a pile of those half square triangles left over, and we can size those to any size we want and make another project. Maybe a nice long table runner to go with the quilt. I'll put a link in the description to the free pattern from Andover Fabrics. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. And be sure to make every day a Sewtacular day. Bye for now.